Good afternoon and welcome to the North Carolina Center for After-School Programs webinar. My name is Sharonda Witter and I'm the manager of NCCAP. So our webinar today will be on youth behavior and safety, particularly child abuse and neglect. And underneath that topic, we're going to focus in on adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. So a little bit of housekeeping notes for you. If you are experiencing any kind of technical delays on your end, it may be necessary to close out any programs that may be running alongside with the Zoom platform. If you have any audio difficulties that continue, keep this number handy, as well as the meeting ID number, which you will need to access this particular webinar utilizing Zoom on your phone. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to include them in the chat window and we will give them to the presenter during their time so they can answer them at the end of the webinar. So our agenda today, we're excited to have presenting Keith Poston from the Public School Forum on the Resilience and Learning Project. Then we'll have Malia Rose Waters from Prevent Child Abuse North Carolina. She will provide an overview of child abuse and neglect. Next, we'll have Elizabeth DeConte from the Public School Forum of North Carolina. She will provide an overview of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. And lastly, we will have Dr. Katie Rosenbaum from the Duke Center for Child and Family Policy share some trauma-sensitive strategies with all of you. And again, those questions that you share in the chat window, we will address them at the conclusion of our webinar. Whenever you see this screen, you know that we will be transitioning our presenters, and our first presenter is going to be Keith Poston from the Public School Forum.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again so much for being here. Thank you, Sharonda. We're excited that you could join us today. I just wanted to welcome you on behalf of the Public School Forum of North Carolina. The North Carolina Center for After-School Programs is an initiative of the Public School Forum, and so we're proud of the work that they're doing to support out-of-school time and after-school learning across North Carolina. The reason why we are doing that, I wanted to say something about this particular project, is around resilience and learning. We, some of you who follow the work of the Public School Forum know that about a year ago we completed the work of a study group on educational opportunity. It was study group 16, 16th one we've done since our organization was founded. And in this particular one, we looked at big issues that were affecting the ability of all children in North Carolina, to achieve, to sort of fulfill, and get all the educational opportunity access that they need. And we looked at areas that might be causing some issues there. And one of them that we identified was childhood trauma and the impact on learning. You're going to hear a lot more on this call, on this webinar, from Dr. Rosenbaum. You're going to hear it from Elizabeth about what we learned and how we are starting to put that into action. But it's the good news is that the research is that we know so much more about it now. We know the impact that it has on children, and we're learning a lot more about how we can best support them. So again, thank you for doing this. We appreciate you being involved. Obviously, you care about children, or you wouldn't be involved in this webinar today. So we hope that you'll get something out of it that you can take back to your organizations and help sort of further the cause for kids in North Carolina. Thanks so much.
Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Malia Rose Waters and I'm the Parent and Community Engagement Manager at Prevent Child Abuse North Carolina. And today I'm going to be speaking about recognizing and responding to suspicions of child maltreatment. So we believe that all children deserve great childhoods because our children are essential to the foundation of our communities, and without them, there is no future. And we know that children who are raised in safe, stable, nurturing environments are more likely to grow up to become successful and healthy adults. So I want to take a quick look at this social ecological model of child abuse and neglect. And you'll see that there's a continuum of both risk and protective factors that can either increase resilience or vulnerability to specific behaviors or conditions. Examination of the ecological model reveals how society, community, families, and the individual all contribute to the well-being of families and children. So if you'll notice that child maltreatment is clearly not the result of a single cause, but of several interactions between individuals and their environment. So the model also helps us look for opportunities to address risk factors or build up protective factors. So keep this ecological model in mind as I go through the different types of child maltreatment today. There are 4 types of abuse that I'm going to talk about today: physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect. Physical abuse is any accident or injury that's non-accidental. A sexual abuse involves a range of sexual activities imposed upon a juvenile and other indirect sexual actions as well. Emotional abuse is expressing attitudes or behavior toward a child that creates emotional damage. And neglect is the failure of a caregiver to provide food, clothing, shelter, medical care, or supervision that ultimately puts that child's health at risk. So throughout the presentation today, I'm going to be talking about indicators or signs of child abuse and neglect. So it's important to remember that the indicators are just considered to be red flags. They're not always definitive signs that maltreatment is occurring, and children exhibit a variety of behaviors based on their developmental stage or their abilities or their exposure to what they're experiencing in their environments. There are a variety of factors that we have to consider when these red flags arise. So when the indicators occur together or repeatedly, that's a strong sign that child maltreatment may be present. And the indicators can be physical, emotional, or behavioral. So let's start with emotional abuse. When you look at the picture on your screen, you can imagine that this parent is saying something to her daughter. Maybe she didn't do something, or she didn't do her homework, or maybe she forgot to clean her room. She came home late, or she was picking on her sibling. Parents may get frustrated with their children, and sometimes they may raise their voices. But emotional abuse is very different. It's constant and recurring. It's not the mom who raises her voice to her daughter as seen in this picture. It's the sustained and repetitive things, such as criticizing a child for developmentally normal behavior, like a toddler wetting her pants. It's setting unrealistic expectations, like expecting them to achieve straight A's or do chores that they're developmentally unable to do. It's belittling or shaming a child, like intentionally embarrassing him publicly or calling him names. Blaming a child for things that they have no control over, like a divorce. Treating one child better than another, like giving special gifts or attention, but not the other. Taking little or no interest in a child. Withholding love and affection. Isolating a child by preventing the child from forming friendships and supportive relationships. Emotional abuse can be one of the most damaging forms of abuse. Moving on to physical abuse. Physical abuse is defined as non-accidental serious injury or injuries to a child. It can include any serious injury or a risk to injury. That includes cruel or grossly inappropriate procedures or use of cruel or inappropriate devices to modify behavior. Examples of physical abuse include harmful restraint, beating, use of a weapon, punching, biting, burning, shaking, and kicking. So what do we mean by accidental versus suspicious injuries? So children are objects in motion, so injuries are inevitable. When trying to determine if an injury is suspicious, you need to consider the following things. 1, children generally move forward in motion, resulting in injuries on the front of their bodies. For example, a child who falls is more likely to scrape the front of her hands than the back. 2, children who accidentally injure themselves through play or developmentally appropriate exploration tend to injure the bony parts of their bodies, such as their forehead or their nose or their palms. 3, children tend to fall to one side or the other. When you see similar markings on both sides of the body, that would mean there was a high probability that the injury is suspicious. An example of this would be bruises across the back of both legs. And 4, be aware of common childhood illnesses and birthmarks that have physical indicators. Fifth disease can leave a child's cheeks red, as if they've been slapped. Birthmarks like Mongolian spots can be mistaken for bruises, and allergies can sometimes cause dark smudges resembling black eyes. So what are some of the behavioral and emotional indicators of physical abuse? Excessive absence from school or childcare, fear of parents or other adults, extreme aggressiveness, deficits in speech and language, hyperactivity, impulsivity, low frustration tolerance, depression, low self-esteem, and suicidal tendencies, being easily agitated or defensive. So it's important for us to consider that social ecological model that we looked at earlier. There are multiple risk factors and protective factors that contribute to the likelihood of physical abuse. For example, research indicates that children are 15 times more likely to be physically abused in homes where domestic violence is present. So in addition to being aware of the indicators, looking at risk factors and family history, there are two questions we should ask ourselves when we're considering whether a child has been physically abused. One, does the injury match the story? And two, is the child developmentally capable of injuring herself in the manner described? Now, when we think about these questions, also know that this is when we're evaluating if there are suspicions of. It is the role of CPS to determine if neglect or abuse have actually occurred. So these are just some questions that you can ask yourself if you have any suspicions. So what is sexual abuse? It includes both physical acts and non-physical acts or non-touching acts. Touching offenses include, but are not limited to, anal or vaginal penetration, fondling, oral to genital contact. Sexual abuse also consists of non-touching offenses, including but not limited to masturbating in front of a child, preparation or distribution of obscene pictures or video of a child, promoting or prostitution of a child, exhibitionism, voyeurism, inappropriate discussion of sexual acts, obscene telephone calls, intentionally letting down the doors of privacy so that a child can hear or see a sexual act. So it's important to note that in North Carolina, children under the age of 16 are not considered able to consent to a sexual act. Sexual abuse is a criminal offense punishable by law. When a report is made to CPS about allegations of sexual abuse, the department is required to make a report to law enforcement. So what is child neglect? It's a failure to provide for the child's basic needs. It can be emotional, physical, medical, educational, or emotional. Neglect means that despite available resources, a child's needs are not met. Neglect is the most basic and frequently charged form of child maltreatment. Half of all child fatalities resulting from child maltreatment are due to neglect. In North Carolina, the majority of substantiations made by CPS are for neglect. Some of the things that can impact a parent's ability to meet a child's needs are lack of resources, not having parenting skills, not having support they need. They don't have the knowledge where to even go to get this support. They have a fear of judgment or dealing with substance use or mental health disorders. Some of the indicators of neglect can include undernourished, a child who appears undernourished or often is hungry, a child who's lethargic, as if the child hasn't slept well for a long period of time, children with long-standing physical marks that go untreated or physical health issues that go untreated. So you can think of that as a child who needs glasses or asthma treatment or medication, and that this has not been addressed. Or children with chronic injuries attributed to a lack of supervision, including injuries that are a result of being harmed by others. Some of the emotional and behavioral indicators: begging, stealing food, poor hygiene, frequent accidents or injuries, risky behavior, developmental delays that are not caused by a disability, clinging behavior or being indiscriminate with affection, and a poor ability to relate to others and poor social skills. North Carolina's statute 7B-301 defines who should report suspected abuse or neglect. Any person or institution that has cause to suspect that a child is being abused or neglected is required by law to report it. This means that everyone is a mandated reporter in North Carolina, and everyone is protected by law. It's acceptable to have an organizational policy, which you may have in place, that includes a designated liaison. For example, it could be your supervisor, or administrator, or a social worker. But it's important to note that it is the liaison's duty to convey the report, not screen whether the report needs to be made. The individual who's the source of the report is still responsible for ensuring that the report is made. So if you have someone who is a designated liaison, it's still your responsibility to ensure that that report is placed. And the individual who's the source of the report is free to personally communicate with DSS, and you cannot lose your job for making a report. So what can you expect whenever you make the call to DSS? First, you'll need to call DSS in the county where the child lives or is found, and you'll be connected to Child Protective Services. You can make your report in person, by telephone, or in writing, and you may report it anonymously, but your protocol may have, or your organization may have protocol about how to handle that, and if you're going to be reporting anonymously or not. DSS is required to keep reporters' identification confidential, but if you do go to court, you could be called to testify. The CPS worker will use a standard intake form and may ask you questions that may not seem relevant. You can just answer those to the best of your ability. If your organization has a policy that an administrator make the referral, it's still your responsibility to make sure the referral gets made. And if possible, you should be there when they make the referral in case questions arise. And anytime you think a child is in immediate danger, call 911. So what types of information is the intake worker going to want from you? The intake worker will be asking you a lot of different questions. That includes name, age, race, sex, and date of birth of the child, address and the phone number of the child, also address and information about the caregiver, names of anyone else with knowledge of the abuse, any known history of substance abuse or domestic violence, and also a description of the family's strengths. So what are some positive things that you can say about this family? So today I've covered just a brief overview of our recognizing and responding to suspicions of child maltreatment training. We do have an online training that's available on our website at preventchildabusennc.org. It's free. It takes about an hour and a half to complete the training. And if you go on our website and click on our work and then trainings and professional development, you'll find the recognizing and responding. And also, if you take this, you can receive a certificate of completion for it. So thank you very much. I'll be available to answer questions if you have any afterwards.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elizabeth DeConti, and I am on staff here with the Public School Forum of North Carolina. And presenting the second part of this presentation will be Dr. Katie Rosenbaum from the Duke Center for Child and Family Policy, who has very much been a part of the Resilience and Learning project that Keith spoke about at the very beginning. So to give you an overview of our project here at the forum that Keith kind of gave you some of the history on with the study group and how we came to be where we are focusing on this initiative is our project has two main key components working in schools. And so currently we're in 2 different districts and a handful of schools. And the 2 components of our project are first a professional development piece, which consists of a training for the entire staff in a school. So we go in and do an overview of what trauma is and the prevalence, the impacts on kids, and then giving school staff some strategies that they can possibly implement in their school that is trauma sensitive. And so with this training, we try to really include every staff member in the building. So not just teachers, but also all administrators, student support staff, and cafeteria workers, custodians, anyone who comes in contact with kids within a school building. And then in addition to that school-wide staff training, we do a more in-depth training with a smaller core group that we are calling resilience teams. So we have each school that we're working in form a resilience team that is made up of the principal, a handful of teachers, usually the guidance counselor or social worker, and they meet bi-weekly with me to provide coaching and consultation to them as they work through a process of first identifying areas of urgency within their school that may be problems related to trauma that they see as themes and issues among their school population, and then working through an action planning process of creating trauma-sensitive strategies that they can implement school-wide. So to begin, we're going to first give an overview of trauma and toxic stress. So trauma's definition is Trauma is not an event itself, but rather a response to a stressful experience in which a person's ability to cope is dramatically undermined. And researchers define trauma as the response to the event rather than the actual event itself, because oftentimes we see families and siblings who experience the same exact thing, but their response to that event may be very different. And so trauma, it can be a response resulting from a one-time event or an ongoing or chronic situation. And the slide here, you see a list of possible events that can cause trauma. So things like poverty and homelessness, lack of basic needs, exposure to violence, everything that Malia was just talking about, physical, sexual, or emotional maltreatment, chronic neglect, caregiver substance abuse or mental illness, loss of a caregiver, whether it's through a caregiver being incarcerated, a custody change, death, parents being deployed overseas. So ACEs, many of you may have heard this term. It stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And this movement began back in the mid-90s in California with an extremely large study done through the CDC and Kaiser Permanente with over 17,000 participants. And the way that the study was conducted was researchers created what they called the ACE questionnaire that was made up of 10 questions about 10 different possible adverse childhood experiences people may have had. And they gave this to each of their patients and had them answer either yes or no to each of those 10 experiences. And at the end of the questionnaire, you tallied up your total number of yeses, and that was considered your ACE score. And one interesting thing to note about those 17,000 participants is that the majority of them were privately insured. So it would just also be interesting to do a similar study on a different type of population as well. But the prevalence that was found in that study was that 64% of the 17,000 reported experiencing at least one ACE. And that's broken down by the number of ACEs each person reported that they experienced. So 26% reported 1, 16% 2, 9.5% 3, and 12.4% of participants reported that they had experienced 4 or more of the ACEs asked about in the questionnaire. And this slide gives you a breakdown, so it shows the 10 different adverse childhood experiences that the questionnaire asked about, and it shows you what the percentage was of the numbers that had experienced each one. So you can see that physical abuse and substance abuse in the home were 2 of the highest, both being almost near 30% of participants. So looking at the impacts of ACEs, so this study not only looked at the prevalence, but also looked at what were the short and long-term impacts that ACEs can have on children and then adults as they grow older. And they found that ACEs can lead to the following: delays and disruption in brain development, social and emotional problems, short and long-term mental and physical health problems, and even in some cases, early death. And so you can see on this chart some of the more specific possible risk outcomes that people who experience ACEs may have. And they did find that the more ACEs a person reported, the higher likelihood they were to experience some of these risk outcomes. So under behavior, you have things like lack of physical activity, smoking, alcoholism, drug use. And then under physical and mental health problems, you have things like severe obesity, diabetes, and then mental health problems like depression, suicide attempts, as well as physical health problems such as heart disease and cancer. And one thing that we do like to note here is that it's not just an automatic that if people experience ACEs or experience more than one ACE, that they automatically will find themselves experiencing these risk outcomes. But one thing that we are here to talk about today, and with our work that we do in the schools, is to provide strategies that can help build resilience in kids who experience ACEs. So the more strategies that are put in place and certain supports and skills that kids are able to build and find in themselves, then the less likelihood they are to experience these possible risk outcomes, even having experienced a high number of ACEs. So looking further at the impact of trauma and toxic stress. So toxic stress is caused by prolonged or pronounced stress that overwhelms children's skills or supports. So there are healthy types of stress that we all experience, whether it's trying something new, going on a job, things that are stressful but are good kinds of stress. But toxic stress occurs when the event causes a response that overwhelms a kid's skills or supports that they have in place. And so this causes a child to go into what many people call either survival mode or a state of stress response. And when a child is constantly in that survival mode state on a regular basis, that actually starts to alter the chemical and neurological events in a child's brain. And so what happens is there's two parts of the brain mainly, and there's one part that controls things like emotions and arousal, and that's what tells our body how to respond when we are experiencing danger or trauma. So we'll talk in a minute about the fight, flight, or freeze response. And so that's the part of the brain that controls that. And then there's the higher functioning part of the brain that controls our ability to learn things like problem solving, our memory, ability to take in new information. And so when a child is constantly experiencing trauma or in that kind of danger response or survival mode, it's hard for their brain to get into the higher functioning areas that allow them to successfully learn. And so this is an image that kind of shows a little bit of how that might work in a child's brain. So you can see two images. One is an MRI scan of a brain with trauma and one that hasn't experienced trauma. And what this is showing is in the brain that has experienced trauma, you can see that the hippocampus, which is a part of the brain that helps to control and regulate emotions, has actually shrunk and not fully developed. And so in the brain with no trauma, you can see that it is larger. And so this shows how there is an actual physical impact on brain development in kids who experience trauma. And so another thing to note here is that children's brains are very high in what we call plasticity. So again, being able to put skills and supports in place for kids helps to further develop their brains in areas that trauma has maybe hindered and not allowed to fully develop. So I want you guys to take a minute and just pause and think about a time that you have been driving. And while you were driving, you were maybe focused on one specific thing, making your grocery list in your head, your first to-do item at work that day, and all of a sudden someone cuts you off and you have to suddenly slam on your brakes. So think about what your mind does in that moment, where your thoughts go, what your body does in that moment, and if you're able to easily go back to the task you were originally thinking about. So probably for many of you, the thoughts you were having immediately escaped you. You weren't easily able to go back to them. You're not able to maybe form clear words or language for a minute or two. Your heart might start racing or you start sweating. And so this is oftentimes how children with trauma, how they may feel all the time. So this is just one small example of a stressful event that we experience on a regular basis. And so this is just an example to give you of how kids with trauma may feel. So in talking about the fight, flight, or freeze response that I mentioned earlier, when a child feels that they are in danger, the brain tells the body to respond in one of these three ways. So the fight response being verbal or physical aggression, the flight response having that instinct to run or escape the danger, and the freeze response, the kids who really just want to shut down or withdraw and become invisible. And in normal situations, the brain telling the body to respond helps to keep us safe. But when this becomes a constant state of being or the norm for a child, it interferes with their functioning, even when they're not in actual dangerous situations. And so these three responses are seen in a wide range of behaviors in kids. So I want you to also take a moment just to think about how you have seen in kids that you work with their fight, flight, or freeze response. And so the way that this looks in kids is, this is a quote to kind of start in showing what that impact might be. And it says, children who have experienced trauma are easily overstimulated and cannot achieve the state of secure readiness that is necessary in order to be open to new information. And so an example of what this might look like is a kid comes into your program and you have no idea what they experienced that morning or the night before, possibly something really bad at home, and they're expected to come into your program or to go into school the next day and sit calmly in a classroom and follow all the rules and be able to learn and take in new information right away. But having experienced that trauma that we may or may not know about is what causes their brains to be overstimulated and not be in that place of readiness to start learning. And so some of the impacts that you might see on kids is that they're more likely to be retained, they have impaired memory, lower verbal skills, more discipline referrals at school, increased externalizing behaviors, a lot of what we've talked about with aggression, defiance, hyperactivity, difficulties paying attention, lower test scores in school, more absences, higher suspension rates, increased internalizing behaviors. What I was mentioning with depression, anxiety, or those kids who often just want to withdraw, and difficulty regulating emotions. And the way that this is often seen in school or after school programs is the impact that it can have on learning and academic performance, their behavior, and their relationships, both with their peers and with adults. So this is a graph that shows the significant impact that trauma can have on academic problems. So I know it's kind of small, maybe hard to fully read, but you can see how the higher number of ACEs that a child has, so each bar shows an increase in the number of adverse events that a child has experienced, the higher risk they have, or the higher that they're showing certain academic outcomes. So the first is showing academic failure. So you can see those with 3 or more adverse events are the highest for that. And then the second one is significant attendance problems. And the last one, significant school behavior problems. And I'm going to turn it over to Katie now.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. So Elizabeth has given you a great background for how kids react to the trauma that they may experience in their lives. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what you all can do in your role to help support these kids and help them to build some skills. The first thing I want to say is that the work of being trauma sensitive is really not about just building in a new program or doing a new curriculum. It's about a mindset shift, changing the way that you view all the children that you come into contact with each and every day. So instead of looking at a child who's misbehaving and thinking, what's wrong with you? Why are you acting like that? You would instead think, what happened to you? And what might you need to help support you to do something differently next time? So again, you're thinking really not even knowing what trauma that child might have experienced, but thinking, gosh, these behaviors that I'm seeing may be symptoms of something going on with the child outside of this after-school program, rather than just a symptom of a child being a bad kid. And so as a result, you're going to respond to what that child is feeling and how you can support that child, rather than responding only to the disruptive behavior. And a quote that we like to use to think about this, one thing that it's easy to think when you see a child behaving in a way that is inconsistent with your expectations, you might think to yourself, well, she controlled herself yesterday, so she can control herself today. You might say that when you see a child who can't read a book he could read yesterday, when a child is misbehaving who behaved just fine yesterday. Well, they're just not trying hard enough. But the other side of it is, if we only knew what happened last night or this morning before this child got to school, then we would be shielding this same child that we are now reprimanding. So without even knowing exactly what traumas are going on in a child's life, changing your mindset to realize something is going on with this child outside of here that I don't know about is going to help you to change your mindset to supporting the skills that this child has. So this is a poem by a wonderful poet down in Georgia that some teachers introduced me to and said that it really helped to open their eyes to the situation of their students. And I'll just read it to you quickly. "'Cause I Ain't Got a Pencil" by Joshua T. Dickerson. "I woke myself up because we ain't got an alarm clock. Dug in the dirty clothes basket because ain't nobody washed my uniform. Brushed my hair and teeth in the dark because the lights ain't on. Even got my baby sister ready because my mama wasn't home. Got us both to school on time to eat us a good breakfast. Then when I got to class, the teacher fussed because I ain't got no pencil." This is the kind of situation that students that you see on a regular basis may be dealing with at home. And it's helpful for us to have that in mind as we consider how to respond to the things that we see in our classrooms. So in shifting our view to being trauma-informed, we're moving away from a traditional view of just looking at the behaviors that we see. So in a traditional view, when you see a student in your after-school program being impulsive, aggressive, maybe withdrawn and they look like they don't care. They're just sitting in the corner with their head down. They're not trying to do anything. Maybe we think, oh my gosh, this kid has ADHD. They just can't sit still. Instead of focusing on those behaviors alone might lead us to think we need to punish this child to change the way they're behaving. A trauma-informed view, though, is going to help us to see behind the behaviors to the situation that's going on leading to those behaviors. So we may instead see a child who's having a hard time regulating their emotions, who is afraid or overwhelmed and just trying to get their needs met the only way that they know how, and who literally don't have skills to behave any better than they are. And it's not to say that we don't need to have a consequence system for children, because they absolutely need structure, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. We need structure, we need expectations, we need consequences, but we also need to be thinking about it more specifically in terms of the skills and support that we need to give to this child so that they have the potential to make a different choice next time. So here are some of the trauma-sensitive strategies that you all might consider, and I will say that we could spend an entire day talking about just this, but I'm going to touch on them, and I want you just to kind of have these in your list of possible tools to learn more about or think more about for your after-school program. First of all, self-regulation is one of the core skills that a child or any of us need to develop in order to be successful both in the classroom and in the rest of our lives. Self-regulation means controlling and managing our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors. So managing how we're thinking to ourselves and how we're paying attention, managing our feelings so that we can calm down and not react out of strong feelings, managing our behavior so that we're not being impulsive and getting into trouble and making bad choices. So I'm not going to go through these in depth, but some of the skills that you're going to want to be thinking about supporting in the students that you work with on a regular basis are skills for each of these areas. So in terms of managing feelings, kids first need to learn how to identify, have words for their feelings, then how to start to manage and calm down when they're having difficult feelings, and then how to consider perspectives of others and have empathy or compassion for others. In terms of your thoughts, again, managing your attention, setting goals and planning to follow through with those goals. And for behavior, as you know, one of the most important things that kids need to be able to learn to be successful in school is how to follow rules and directions, manage their impulses, keep trying when things are hard. The great thing about self-regulation is it's a learned skill just like literacy. If you're going to teach a kid to read, you wouldn't just say, okay, we're going to give you a 10-week program. We're going to teach you all the things you need to know about reading. You're good to go. You're all set. Your life of literacy has begun. It's the same way with self-regulation. It's something that you learn on a continuum of skills that grow over time throughout your adulthood, throughout your life. And it's not something that is time sensitive. So if a child has not learned their self-regulation skills yet when they come to you, all is not lost. You can absolutely still teach them those skills and be working with them and coaching those skills just the same way as you could a child who had not learned to read at a young age. So I'm just going to go through again a few categories of things that you could consider doing in your after-school program that would help these kids to build the resilience that you want to see in them. The first would be, and after school is a great place for this, to incorporate a curriculum that does specifically teach self-regulation and coping skills. These are a few listed here that have some specific evidence on them that we know are effective in helping kids to learn self-regulation skills. Second step is one I know I've seen in a lot of schools in North Carolina. And after school can be a really good place for these kinds of curricula to be taught because you've got these kids in a kind of a captive audience and you don't have the same need to focus on academics that maybe the teachers do throughout the rest of the day. So really being able to actively teach these kids self-regulation skills is super helpful. In addition to teaching the skills directly to these students, you really need to be providing them with a lot of support. And we call this co-regulation. So we want the students to be regulating themselves, but we all know that even as adults, sometimes we need support in regulating ourselves. We can't always do it alone. We may need our spouse or our friend or our buddy to kind of come and say, hey, you've had a rough day, let's take a deep breath together. So kids, even more so, need that co-regulation and support. And there are three key areas that as a caregiver or an educator, you play a key role in helping these kids to build these resilient skills. The most important first thing is to develop a warm, responsive relationship We're going to say more about all of these in just a moment. The second is providing a structured environment where it's very predictable, where the child knows exactly what's coming next and what is expected of them to be successful. And the third is coaching those skills that we just talked about. So I gave you kind of a laundry list of some of the skills that kids need to learn, but they don't learn them at the drop of a hat. Just like you're teaching someone to play baseball, you're going to need to coach them, practice, 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 prompt them to use those skills. So let's dive into some of those in a little bit more depth. First of all, absolutely essential. You cannot help someone else self-regulate until you learn how to self-regulate yourself. And we all need help with this, as I said, from day to day in different settings. But think about the way that you respond when you're really feeling overwhelmed, upset, anxious, and start to think about some of the skills that you use to calm down on a regular basis. Some things that are really helpful for caregivers to do is to practice stress management or coping skills. You know, do you need to take a deep breath? Do you need to take a moment to, go read a funny comic strip or something like that to help you to calm down? Drink a glass of water. Think about some problem solving you can do for your own life stressors to help yourself with what's going on in your life. Mindfulness is yet another way to help you focus on being in the present moment and letting go of all that extra stress that we carry around with ourselves every day. When you're in that stressful interaction, though, with a child, the first thing to do is to calm down, because you know from being in a classroom or being in a situation with kids that as soon as your emotion starts to escalate, so do the kids. So pay attention to your own feelings first. Put on your own oxygen mask first before you try to put on that of the children, and help yourself to calm down so that the situation does not escalate. Then again, remember your trauma-focused lens and the possibility that this child is dealing with a lot of stuff that you're not aware of, and use your own strategies to stay calm and respond effectively. Some of the things that schools or after-school programs might use to support their staff would be training in ACEs, some of what you're getting right now, to understand the process with kids. Self-care strategies. Some schools have programs where they have yoga or Zumba classes after school, where they have a buddy system. So there's someone you can check in with, get some feedback, have someone to help you calm down when you've really had a rough day. Some schools like to focus on some staff climate things. How can we get the staff some goodie bags, or have a snack attack after school one day to treat the staff and help you all realize you are playing such a vital role. You are such valuable professionals for these kids and their lives, and you need to be respected and taken care of as well. And then finally, the communication tone and the relationships among the staff and between the administration and the staff members. That positive tone really sets the groundwork. Okay, the next thing, and this is probably the most important thing that you can think about on a regular basis, is building relationships with those students. Greeting those kids by name every single day, every time you see them, so that they know that you remember them, you see them, and they are important to you. 30-second check-ins. Can you find a child, can you make time in each week to check in with each child once during that week, and just spend 30 seconds just asking about how they're doing, what are their interests, what's going on with them. Again, so that they feel like you care, and so that they have a vested interest in earning your good attention. Positive comments. People roll their eyes at me when I say this, but it's very important in all relationships that you have a ratio of 5 to 1 in your positive to negative interactions. So when you have a child that you've had a negative interaction with, you want to make sure that you then build in chances for those 5 additional positive interactions. Thumbs up, smiles, tell them what they're doing you like, catch them being good, because that's going to put the money back in the relationship bank that you have, and make sure that you really still have a strong relationship with that child. It can just be as simple as a thumbs up, like I said, or those positive connections throughout the afternoon, showing them that you see the good things they're doing, and you care about them. And again, that culture of respect and kindness, even among the staff and between you and the kids, is critical, just to lay that groundwork for what is expected in terms of behavior. Expectations and routines. Kids need structure. They absolutely need to know what's expected. They need it to be predictable. They need to know what they're supposed to be doing in each moment, so that they feel safe and they can follow those rules and guidelines. So setting clear rules that are consistent from day to day, and that are posted, and that you remind them and you practice, like, hey, let me see those walking feet. Let's go out to the playground using our tiptoe feet today, so that you've practiced a lot all of those kinds of skills that you want the kids to show you. catching those students being good and saying specifically what you see. I love the way that you are sitting with your hands in your own lap and reading that book quietly so that all of your friends can focus on their work. Tell them what you like, because they want that attention from you. They want attention however they can get it. And if they're only going to get it when you're fussing at them, they're going to be bad. You want them to get attention for the good things that they're doing. And you want to tell them exactly what you like so that you'll see more of that. And I tell you what, if you go to one child and say, I really like the way you're sitting there reading quietly, you'll be amazed at the number of kids who immediately start reading quietly so that you'll notice them too. Limit opportunities for risky behavior. Notice the parts of your room, the parts of your space where negative things tend to happen. And see what you can do about that. Can you set up the structure of the room differently? Can you put up a mirror that helps you to see behind this bookshelf? How can you help to limit the chances for them to get in trouble in the first place? So that leads us to this physical space idea. Again, it's helpful if you have a different space in the room for each activity and they know, okay, this is the drawing area. If I'm here, that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm not allowed to take the drawing supplies over to the wall and draw on the wall, for example. You want to have calm down areas. You see here in this slide a picture of a place where there's some nice stuffed animals, some cushy things to hold, some books to look at. Anything that's multi-sensory, where a child knows this is a place where I can go to be alone if I need to calm down. I'm not going to be bugged here, and I'm going to get to just sit here and get myself together. And you might need to remind a child to use that area, but it's great to have that in the room and have it be an expectation. Everyone gets upset sometimes. Everyone needs to calm down. Here's how you use this space when you're feeling overwhelmed and you just need to take a breath. And I'll come over and show you how to take a breath, and coach them through that process. Then also think about the physical ambiance. That's something that I say a lot of times kids can help with. If you want to draw a garden on the wall, have the kids help you paint some flowers. If you want to put up different posters, have them help you pick out some posters that they really love. Plant some plants outside the space, but just to make the space seem inviting and warm and happy for them. Discipline and behavior management. Obviously, that's something that you're going to have to deal with one way or the other. As much proactive strategies as you put in place, there's always going to be some behavior challenges. Again, the second that you see a struggle beginning, think about your own feelings and calm yourself down as you're walking in to interact and to help de-escalate the situation. Think about what it is that might be triggering a student. And think about that for each kid, because it's going to be different things with different kids. If you have a child who's often misbehaving, what is happening just before that misbehavior? Is it a loud environment that is upsetting? Is it a quiet environment that's upsetting? Is it, gosh, they always get upset right before we have snack break. Think about what those triggers are so that you can be a visible presence for that student and be available to support them in those kinds of situations where they might be upset. You want to redirect them with a calm voice. Even if they're making a bad choice, you're keeping a calm, firm voice is going to help them to calm down and help them to make better choices. And even when you need to give them a consequence, you can give that consequence calmly and with respect for that student, and communicate to that student that you believe they will make a better choice next time, and that you still care about them, you still welcome them into the group, and we're all practicing to make better choices tomorrow. All is not lost because they made a bad choice today. This is an important thing for you to think about, though, as you're going in to intervene with a child that's becoming upset. Think about this curve and think about the top of the curve as being the place where you are the most angry, upset, frustrated that you have ever been, and you are just, you're 5 years old and you don't have any skills to keep that under wraps, and you're just ready to throw things because you're just so angry. That is not the moment that you want to go and intervene with a child. Just like Elizabeth was talking about with the example of someone coming in front of you in the car, when you have to slam on the brakes, when that fight, flight, or freeze gets into place, you lose your ability to use language. When children get to that top level of upset, they can't use their language either. And chatting with you about what's going on is just not going to be successful. You're going to be frustrated. They're going to be frustrated. It's not going to work out. So the best thing to do is to notice their early warning signs. And as you start to understand triggers for a child, you will be able to see, oh, we're heading in a bad direction. That's the place to come in, because you can come in right then and say, you're getting a little bit mad. And go to them proximity. Go right over to them. Be near them and say, it looks like you're getting upset. Let's go to the calm down spot and calm down. And coach them through that process before they lose it. If they get to the lose it place, if they're at the top of that curve, that's time just to make sure everybody is safe and help everybody to calm down. The last thing you want to do there is escalate the situation, help everybody to calm down, make sure they're safe. Once they've come down on the other side, once they're calmer, once their language is back in their brains again and they can have a conversation with you, that's the next place to intervene. And to think about problem solving. How can we do this different next time? What kind of choices can we make next time? So that is it for what we're going to talk about today. Those are a few of the strategies that you might consider using in your school. I am going to turn it back over to Sharonda because I imagine there may be a few questions for us. So thank you for your attention.
So if you guys have any questions, we're inviting you at this time to put them into the chat window, and we will wait a moment or two to see if any questions come in. We see that there are no questions coming in, so at this time we are going to conclude.
Someone wants to know if they will receive the PowerPoint slides.
Yes, so we do have a question regarding the PowerPoints. You will receive the PowerPoint. Actually, the PowerPoint is already up on our website, nccap.net, and if you click on convene and go to webinar and select our October webinar, the presentation that you just saw is already up there, the PowerPoint. The recording will be up by the latest. It should be up by tomorrow. The recording of all of the presenters should be up by tomorrow. Any other questions?
Just about the recording.
Okay. Well, we hope that you all have enjoyed this presentation. Our presenters were phenomenal. Again, all of the documents, the PowerPoint, as well as the recording will be on our website as late as tomorrow. And so we hope that you enjoy this webinar, and we will see you all in November for our next topic. Have a great day.